Hello and welcome to Declassified UK. I'm Phil Miller, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Iona Craig. For those of you who don't know Iona, she's one of Britain's leading journalists on covering Yemen, where she lived and worked for many years, including during the conflict there. Today, Iona is going to talk to me about a very fascinating development linked to Yemen and the current genocidal conflict in Gaza, which is the emergence of the Houthi blockade of Israeli-linked shipping in the Red Sea. Iona, could you tell us how significant this challenge is that the Houthis are presenting to Israel's military campaign in Gaza?
Yeah, absolutely. What started for the Houthis as a kind of campaign against Israeli-owned and linked vessels, then sort of broadened to, they said, to Israeli ships that were bound for Israel or due to dock in Israeli ports. It seems to have gone in beyond that now, and it's quite unclear now, looking at some of the ships, what, if any, connection they've got to Israel. And I think that's what has kind of put the wind up a lot of the international shipping now, is not knowing who the Houthis might attack. And so, yes, that's put in turn a huge amount of pressure on the US, as much as Israel, really, who are now under pressure to kind of protect international shipping. And, you know, the stated aim of the Houthis has always been that this is about the war in Gaza, that they will not stop until the food and aid goes into Gaza. But again, they've kind of upped the ante on that now by saying that they won't stop until Israel's bombing and war in Gaza stops. So they've been kind of quite almost dismissive now of this US naval cooperation or international cooperation that's supposedly about to be launched. It has been launched, but it hasn't actually started anything in the Red Sea to protect the shipping. The Houthis have shown that they're not too bothered about that. And so, yes, the attacks have got up to a kind of daily point by the beginning of this week. They'd started off slightly sporadically back in November. There was the quite well reported by the Houthis anyway, hijacking of the Galaxy Leader, where they landed a helicopter quite spectacularly on the deck and hijacked the vessel, which is now, along with its crew, in the port of Hodeidah on Yemen's west coast. But since then, they've been carrying out drone attacks, missile attacks, and the US Navy had been involved, the French Navy, even the British Navy over last weekend. And then it all kind of came to a head, really, down because of the international shipping companies. They, at the end of last week, started saying they were going to divert shipping from the Red Sea route up to the Suez Canal, because of what was going on. And that really forced the hand of the US. I think a lot of that is, it's kind of, in some respects, these private companies, these shipping companies that make millions of dollars every year, lording it over the US and putting them over a barrel in some respects, and saying, we want you to take action. So, you know, kind of echoes of the East India Company in some ways, and forcing the US to kind of take some form of, even if it's defensive, but military action. And I think we saw that as well over the weekend and early this week with Lloyd's List, which is the kind of journal of record, although it's only online these days, that has existed since the sort of 18th century. And they wrote an op-ed literally calling for gunboat diplomacy. And so, yeah, there's been, the kind of, in that respect, the pressure was put on the US, and they kind of had to do something. And also there were reports coming out that Israel had sort of said, if you don't do something to the US, we'll take action against the Houthis. People like General Botel, who was the former head of Central Command, another retired commander who commanded the USS Cole, which was the naval ship that got attacked off Yemen's coast by Al-Qaeda back in 2000. They've both come out sort of saying, yes, we need to bomb the Houthis, we need to take out, you know, their batteries and all this kind of stuff. But actually, the reasonable solution to all of this is a ceasefire in Gaza. You know, that's better for the people in Gaza, obviously, but it also solves this problem for the US. So, you know, it's all very well making these hawkish statements, but it's slightly ridiculous in the sense of you're just putting more violence on violence, when actually the solution to this is a ceasefire.
The Houthis, despite being coming from one of the poorest Arab states and having probably the most limited arsenal have seemed to have taken this step. And we've seen in Palestine, there was a poll of civil society opinion there that was published last week, that put Yemen as the most popular Arab actor, probably because of the steps that have been taken there. And the Israeli Navy, of course, is shelling Gaza. And so if they had to divert ships south down into the Red Sea to deal with this Houthi maritime operations, then that would divert them from being able to shell Gaza with such intensity. So it does look like, with the Royal Navy, with HMS Diamond taking out this drone at the weekend, that US and UK Navy are effectively filling in for the Israeli Navy, and are allowing them to keep shelling Gaza and not have to deal with this threat themselves. One thing with the with BP as well, pulling their shipping through the region, we know that BP is very well integrated into Whitehall, into the UK foreign policy establishment, and perhaps that led to some of the pressure on the Royal Navy to take more aggressive action against the Houthi drones. Can you tell us, Aina, sort of where the Houthis have come from, and how, in contrast to the Arab monarchies in the region, they're able to have this kind of foreign policy? A lot of kind of conservative MPs just say that they're an Iranian proxy and that it's purely down to Iranian influence on them. But do you think they are a movement that has a certain degree of support within Yemen?
The Houthis really came out of a Zaidi revivalist movement in the 1990s. The Zaidis is a branch of Shia Islam which is pretty much unique to Yemen. And the concern had come in the kind of most northern part of Yemen, which the Houthis are from, which is Sada, right up on the Saudi border, was coming from the spread of Salafism and Wahhabi Salafism out of Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia had, by the late 70s, early 80s, been funding schools and mosques in Yemen as part of that. And so the concern was in the kind of Zaidi areas that there was going to be a kind of, a threat as far as a religious one, if you like, to their way of life and their traditions. So the Believing Youth was set up as a youth movement in the 1990s. One of the founders of that was Hussein al-Houthi, who was a Yemeni parliamentarian. And he was then shot and killed by Yemeni security force in 2004. And that sparked what became 6 rounds of war between the Houthis and the Yemeni government, headed by then President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was president of Yemen for sort of 33 years up until the Arab Spring in 2011. Now, the Houthis did actually join the anti-government protests in 2011 during the revolution, which meant they had to put down their weapons to do that, and they joined the peaceful protests. But I think they felt very unrepresented after that in what happened in the kind of political transition, as were a lot of other groups in Yemen. But they had then at least the kind of the fighting history that they decided to take action by force, if you like. And also, it was also down to the former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had been forced out of power because of the Arab Spring. And he basically did a deal with his old enemy in the Houthis, and he helped facilitate their sort of fight south from Sada through Amran down to Sana'a, the capital, in 2014. And the Houthis, although they besieged a military camp that was aligned to Saleh's kind of greatest enemy within the military, and who had targeted the Houthis a lot in those earlier wars, after they took that military camp in Sana'a, there was barely a shot fired, because all the loyalists within the military who were with Saleh basically just sort of welcomed the Houthis into the city, really. But they didn't stop there, and they kept taking territory. And eventually, by early 2015, they had forced the new President Hadi, into exile in Saudi Arabia, and that's when the Saudis got involved. There was always the claim, particularly by Saleh when he was fighting them, funnily enough, that they were connected to Iran, had support for Iran, that they were getting weapons shipped to them from Iran. And certainly there was political support, even in the early days. But that wasn't unusual for Iran, in the sense they'd also hooked up with the southern movement in southern Yemen, which couldn't be more ideologically the kind of the opposite of the Houthis, in the sense of hedging their bets slightly, of supporting other groups in the region. So yes, it was a political one to start with, but it became a self-fulfilling thing. So once the war started in 2014 and then escalated massively with Saudi getting involved in 2015, yes, Iran went in kind of fully with aiding the Houthis militarily. So that involves training, providing weapons, helping the Houthis build the same weapons that are in Iran. I mean, even the kind of big military parade that was in Sana'a, the last one, which was in September of this year, so literally a few weeks before the Hamas attack on October 7th, the missiles and drones that the Houthis were displaying were all kind of replicas, but given a new name that you would see in the Iranian arsenal. So and things like the kind of hijacking of the Galaxy Leader, which was a very sophisticated operation. The Houthis are not this ragtag militia, which they definitely started as in the early 2000s, and arguably even still were in 2014. And now they are this sophisticated non-state actor, but they wouldn't have been able to carry out an operation like that without some serious training and assistance, and that would have come from Iran. But yeah, this has made them hugely popular. I mean, I talked to a lot of Yemenis in the kind of anti-Houthi side within the civil war in Yemen, and as they will begrudgingly, some of them say, listen, we hate the Houthis, but we really like what they're doing. This is great. Nobody else is standing up for Palestinians in Gaza and the civilians in Gaza. What else is any country doing in the region for the people in Gaza who are being ethnically cleansed and slaughtered on a daily basis? Nothing. And I think that frustration is borne out not just even in the region, but across the rest of the world as well. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Houthis are nobody's here, are no heroes, and there's no good side and bad side in this kind of civil war in Yemen. The Houthis have a kind of zero tolerance for any people that show any disapproval of their rule. They've really cracked down on women's rights, and I've still got Yemeni friends, female friends in Sana'a, and they've had to suffer the consequence of that. They're not allowed to travel anywhere without a male guardian now, and that's completely down to Houthi doctrine. They, tortured and killed even prisoners, including journalists, in Houthi controlled territory. But yeah, in this instance, the anti-Israeli, anti-Western thing is part of who the Houthis are and has been right since the beginning. Their slogan that they have on their flags, on painted up mountains, and that they chant whenever there's an opportunity, is death to America, death to Israel, damn the Jews, and victory to Islam. That's kind of, that is their slogan. And so this is an opportunity to kind of act on that, really. And I think it's probably even surprised them slightly of how much kind of kudos it's given them. And I think that also feeds the fact that why they're reluctant to back down as well, because they're now these kind of regional hero figures, and it's an added bonus for them.
Yeah, I think we've all been quite surprised at how they've kind of generated this cult status so quickly, because as you say, they're extremely divisive in Yemen, hence the very long-running civil war. I remember interviewing some artists from Sana'a last year who'd sought asylum in the UK because they were being persecuted by the Houthis because their art was seen as too kind of subversive. So I'm well aware of the divisions that they've caused in Yemen, and this is remarkable that it seems to be such a popular rallying cry, and perhaps, like you say, just because of the dearth of any other Arab states really doing anything at all to help the people in Palestine. But there's been some quite sort of hawkish talk from some people about how this US-led naval task force, could quite quickly. I saw someone saying on Twitter, as soon as my Amazon deliveries get delayed, I want the Tomahawks to start flying in. It's really, really kind of bullish talk. But as you said, the Houthis have won and endured so many wars in the last years. and their arsenal has become more sophisticated each time. I think towards the end of the confrontation with Saudi, we saw they were actually shooting down some Saudi Tornado jets and these kind of things. So they clearly have started to develop some kind of ground-based air defense capability. Could you tell us a little bit about just how full on we mentioned the Iran support for the Houthis, but the other side of that coin, right, is that the UK and the US really went all in on supporting the Saudi-led coalition to try and defeat them. Can you tell us a little bit about, particularly on the UK side, armed companies like BAE Systems, just how integral they became to the Saudi war machine, despite all the war crimes and atrocities that we saw the Saudi Air Force committing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is where I take issue with the Houthis being called an Iranian proxy, because they're not. They are partners and they're allies, but they absolutely do their own thing. And if you want to call the Houthis a proxy of Iran, then we should be calling Saudi Arabia a proxy of the UK or a proxy of the US, because we did everything in our power to assist them in particularly the air war in Yemen. And that was a devastating air campaign that research has shown was targeting civilian infrastructure, but in particular Yemen's ability to feed itself and produce food. And the knock-on effect of that was near famine conditions across the country, and tens of thousands of civilians dying, not in the fighting side of the conflict, but as a result of the kind of devastating humanitarian crisis that was completely man-made. And that was made by those tactics in the air campaign, as well as the de facto blockade of the Saudis restricting imports into Houthi-controlled territory. So yeah, I mean, even as we found out during the conflict, was BAE has been absolutely central to that. And that, as a BAE employee said, we did everything but drop the bombs. They trained the UK has trained the pilots, maintained the planes, made the bombs, made the planes. In some cases, helped on intelligence, and similarly the US as well with the refueling, in-flight refueling, and intelligence as well. So yeah, the British hands are all over the war in Yemen in that respect. And yeah, if you're going to call the Houthis a proxy of Iran, then Saudi Arabia is a proxy of Britain, which is a ludicrous thing to say, because Saudi Arabia does what it likes when it likes as well. So yeah, but you can't make one claim without stating the other, because it's very similar relationships in that respect. And actually, I think in some ways the Saudis are more reliant on the UK and those weapons and training of fighter pilots than even the Houthis are on Iran.
Thanks for watching this discussion with Iona Craig. If you'd like to see more video chats about our articles and the work that we do at Declassified, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can also go on our website and make a donation to us there. Thank you.